The machinery that once turned pressure into output doesn't know how to rest in enjoyment. It knows how to pursue and conquer, so it keeps looking for the next target. Rest itself can feel threatening. An open weekend, an unscheduled evening. Instead of relief, there's a low-grade tension. You reach for work or planning or some problem to solve. Stillness exposes the fact that the old engines are idling with nowhere to go.
Welcome to Beyond Success, the podcast for high achievers seeking deeper meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. Now, here's your host, world-renowned leadership coach and therapist, David Tian, PhD.
In this episode, I want to chart out something that most capable, successful people sense, but rarely truly understand. You can build a life that looks good on the outside, but underneath all of that, there's a kind of pressure that keeps running. It pushes when pushing actually isn't required. It tightens up when nothing is actually under threat. It drains your energy, even on good days. I'm not here to improve you. I'm not offering a new habit or some kind of sharper mindset. I want to help you see what's actually already operating under the surface, because once you can see it clearly, you don't have to be ruled by it. This matters more after success than before it, because early on, inner pressure can be useful. It can sharpen your attention. It can keep you up late at night working. It can make you endure what other people wouldn't. But the very forces that built your life don't retire once they've done their job. They continue to steer your choices and shape your relationships and define what feels urgent long after the original conditions that they were built for have changed. If you don't see those forces, they don't just go away. They simply take over and keep deciding for you. We tend to tell a flattering story about success. We say it's discipline or intelligence or confidence or maybe resilience. Those are tidy explanations. But anyone who's actually succeeded in some area of life knows that something more complicated was at work. Traits don't just wake you up at 3 a.m. Traits like those don't just create that restless edge that keeps you moving all the time. Success is usually generated by internal systems that learn how to function under pressure, and those systems don't know when to stop, so they keep running even when the pressure's gone or when the pressure's easing off. So let me introduce you to the concept of inner machinery. When I say inner machinery, I don't mean trauma in some clinical sense. I definitely don't mean pathology. I mean the internal systems that generate action automatically before you sit down and reason your way through anything. The parts of you that move first and justify later. Okay, here's an example. Think of fear that can sharpen your focus, the kind that keeps you alert in a high-stakes meeting, or when a deal is on the line, or when you're trying to meet a late-night deadline. That fear isn't weakness. It's motivating. It's precision. It's scanning for threats and tightens up your thinking. Think also of hunger, not just for money, but for impact or recognition or being taken seriously. That hunger sustains your effort over years or decades. It gets you through boredom and doubt. It's an engine. Then, here's another example. There's approval seeking, that sensitivity to how you're perceived by others, the ability to read a room quickly, to adjust your tone of voice, to sense where influence lies in the room. Many leaders call this intuition, but often it began as a need to stay in good standing with someone way back when. Aggression belongs here too, that willingness to push through the resistance, to take up space, to say no, to insist. Without some aggression, nothing substantial can get built. Desire is another one. Desire fuels creation. I don't mean just sexual desire, but the pull towards beauty and novelty and expansion, the urge to make something that wasn't there before. So none of these systems are accidents. They all formed for, at that time, positive reasons, usually in response to conditions that demanded you to adapt, like pressure in your family, or intense competition at school, or uncertainty about whether you belonged to a tribe or community or a group of people. It's in response to limited resources or high expectations. You learned, consciously or not, which internal systems helped you survive and which ones didn't, and then which ones helped you excel and beat out the competition. The trouble begins when those systems keep running long after the original conditions what that they were originally developed for have gone away or have changed. What once protected you back then now insists on continuing to steer everything. And because it worked back then, you assume it must still be right. Okay, so the very adaptations that helped you survive early on often become the engines of your success later on. What begins as survival intelligence ends up becoming a life strategy. You learn how to read tension in a room because tension in a room once really mattered. Later, that same sensitivity lets you anticipate how boardrooms will go, the board dynamics, or how markets might shift, or political undercurrents. It looks like strategic instinct, but it started as vigilance. A nervous system that learned to tolerate pressure becomes an advantage. While other people shut down under stress, you actually stay sharp and maybe even a step up. You can hold complexity without flinching. That isn't random, because at some point you had to function under extreme load. And now in adulthood, that capacity is rewarded, especially in your professional life. A need to be impressive, or at least not dismissed, can evolve into taste and standards. You push for excellence because mediocrity once carried a heavy cost. And over time, the years, decades, that insistence produces real output. People might call it drive, but underneath it, it's often a refusal to feel small again. Even aggression, in its cleanest form, can become leadership. The willingness and the readiness to go first, to make the first move, to confront, to decide, to assert. Many people avoid those moments, but you don't. That trait rarely appears out of nowhere. So none of this is accidental, and none of this is bad. None of it is pathological. It's how many high performers are made. The same inner systems that once kept you safe or relevant or visible later scale into competence and authority. Okay, there's an internal integrity and dignity to it. The complication arises only when those systems never update. When the world outside changes, but the machinery keeps running as if nothing has. Okay, and that's where things get complicated. These systems don't update themselves just because your circumstances or your environment or your life improves. They were built under extreme pressure back then, and pressure trained them well. Then success rewards them again and again. Every time fear sharpened your focus and you won, it got reinforced, so you did it again. Every time hunger pushed you further and it paid off, that loop tightened up. Your body and mind learned a simple lesson. Keep all of this running. So even when the original conditions no longer apply, the machinery keeps operating as if they do. You no longer need to prove you belong, but the approval engine still is working, scanning the room. You're financially secure now, but the fear system still reacts to minor risks as if survival were on the line. You have more choice than ever, but the aggression system still assumes everything is a contest. What makes this really tricky is that loyalty to these old systems starts to feel like integrity. You tell yourself, this is just who I am. I'm disciplined, I'm intense, I don't relax standards. And of course, there's truth in that, obviously. These systems did build your life. They earned a respect. But over time, something subtle happens. The machinery begins to choose first, and reflection only comes later. You accept another commitment before asking whether you actually want it. You push through a conflict before considering whether it's even necessary. You double down on effort before asking what the effort is even serving now. The decisions still look competent and normal from the outside, and that's what makes it hard to even question them. But underneath, in the unconscious, the choice wasn't fully yours. It was the most rehearsed internal system stepping forward again and taking over. If you don't slow down long enough to notice this, you end up living inside a structure that made sense decades ago, but no longer fits the stage you're in now. And because it once worked, you assume it must still be right, and you relied on it for so long that that's all you've got, or that's the feeling anyway. So you just keep running, and it runs you down. And when that happens, the cost doesn't usually show up in your calendar, at least not for a while. It shows up in your relationships, in your body, in your private moments. Intimacy becomes a lot more effortful. You can talk for hours about strategy or ideas, but when the conversation turns toward what you actually feel, You notice a kind of stiffness or a blankness or a numbness. Not hostility, just a distance. You stay competent, you stay composed, but closeness requires you to loosen these systems that were built to keep you on alert. And that feels unsafe in a way that you can't quite explain and that you don't really have much control over now. Desire does something strange too. It either flattens so that very little feels compelling to you, or it spikes in short, intense bursts. You chase novelty, you chase stimulation, you chase intensity or variety, and then it quickly fades. The machinery that once turned pressure into output doesn't know how to rest in enjoyment. It knows how to pursue and conquer, so it keeps looking for the next target. Rest itself can feel threatening. An open weekend, an unscheduled evening. Instead of relief, there's a low-grade tension. You reach for work or planning or some problem to solve. Stillness exposes the fact that the old engines are idling with nowhere to go. And then there's your conscience. Moral seriousness returns, but not as clarity. It comes as fatigue, a sense that certain compromises no longer sit well, that certain patterns don't feel clean. You've done nothing obviously outrageous, but something in you resists the idea of continuing on autopilot. None of this means you're broken. None of it means your earlier drive was misguided. These are signals that the inner organization that once served you well is now out of date. The systems aren't evil. They're loyal. They're doing what they were trained and adapted to do. The question is whether you are still willing to let them decide how your life goes. Sometimes the real problem isn't more effort or more motivation. It's knowing the right direction. A lot of people listening to this podcast are capable and driven. Things still look fine on paper, but life still feels strangely flat. When that happens, more advice usually isn't the answer. Clarity is. I've put together a short assessment that takes about 2 minutes. It's simply a way to see which area deserves your attention most right now, whether that's relationships, decision-making, or how pressure is being handled day to day. Based on your responses, you'll be sent a short set of masterclasses related to that area. If that sounds useful, you can find it at dtphd.com/quiz. That's dtphd.com/quiz. Let me give you an example to illustrate this. I worked with a founder in his 40s who had already exited one company and was building another. He was smart, calm, obviously financially secure. By any external measures, he was doing well. What brought him to see me wasn't a crisis. It was, after talking to each other, for a while we identified a pattern. He kept cycling through relationships with women he admired and respected, and then a year or two in, he would start to feel trapped. Not abused, not mistreated, just he'd get this overwhelming feeling of being trapped. He would become restless, then critical, then he'd distance himself, subtly at first, then very obviously avoidant, and then he would just leave, disappear, ghost. And afterward, he'd feel relief mixed with a kind of private disappointment in himself and a regret. When we slowed it down long enough to perceive this, the machinery became a lot clearer. Growing up, closeness to him meant intense scrutiny that often was paired with punishment. Affection came with high expectations. Being seen and known meant actually being evaluated. So he learned to excel and to charm, but never to fully relax into intimacy. Distance to him was a kind of safety. So that system scaled beautifully for decades. It made him independent. It made him decisive, a leader. It made him capable of walking away from bad deals. But in his personal life, that same machinery was still running in the background, and sometimes often in the foreground. The moment a relationship deepened, this old engine would kick in. Autonomy first, and leave before you're cornered. Once we were able to identify that and he appreciated it and saw it, his story about how his life was and who he was changed. He wasn't bad at relationships. He was loyal to an internal system that once protected him. The question stopped being, why can't I commit? And instead became, is this system still serving the life I say I want now? That's the level at which inner machinery operates. It doesn't scream or have red alarms or red flags. Instead, it quietly decides for you under the hood, underneath the surface. And now I think it'd be helpful to draw a careful distinction because some of you already are familiar with approaches, psychotherapeutic approaches like internal family systems or IFS. IFS offers a way of understanding the mind as composed of different parts or subpersonalities in a kind of Jungian sense. They try to protect us. IFS invites you to notice these parts, to relate to them with curiosity, and to understand what they're afraid of. It assumes that even the most disruptive behavior began as an attempt to help. So clearly, there's an overlap between that and what I'm calling inner machinery. Both perspectives recognize that we're not a single, seamless will. Both treat these internal systems as adaptive rather than defective, and both insist that awareness matters more than suppressing them. If you try to crush fear or silence hunger by force, they usually come back even louder. But the emphasis is different between the two. When I speak about inner machinery, I'm using functional and developmental language instead of therapeutic language. I'm not asking which part of you is wounded. I'm asking which system is currently running under pressure. I'm less concerned with healing some old injury than with understanding what is choosing on your behalf today. That distinction really matters for high-functioning adults. Many of you don't experience yourselves as patients. You're not looking to be treated. You're trying to live deliberately, consciously, well. If the conversation quickly becomes about wounds and repair, this can subtly lower your posture. It can frame you as someone in need of fixing, rather than someone who's actually capable of real responsibility. Inner machinery keeps the focus on authority, not domination, not suppression, authority. Which systems get to decide? When fear speaks, do you automatically obey? When hunger demands expansion, do you automatically comply without question? Or can you pause long enough to say, thank you for what you've done, but this time I'm choosing differently now. In that sense, the goal isn't internal harmony as some kind of emotional state. Instead, it's like conscious restraint. It's the ability to recognize that a once useful engine is now revving at the wrong time. It's the capacity to decide when aggression is needed and when it becomes excessive. And that's less about comfort and a lot more about moral seriousness. Now, none of this means the therapeutic lens is wrong. Many people use both privately, like I do. You might work with IFS to understand how a protective part formed in childhood, and that is obviously deeply valuable. The difference here is the public language and purpose of these frameworks. In this context, and for this podcast, we're not centering pathology. We're centering responsibility. You've built a life through certain internal systems. The question now is not whether those systems are good or bad. It's whether you remain willing to let them define what kind of life you continue to build into the future. Okay, and so this is where many people might feel that self-improvement reflex kicking in. Because once you recognize these systems, the natural self-improvement, self-development instinct is to fix them, to optimize fear, to dial down hunger, to eliminate the need for approval, to become calm and balanced and fully integrated. Right? It sounds mature. It sounds responsible. Okay, but it misses the point. These systems are not bugs in the code. They are engines. If you try to eliminate them, you weaken the very capacities that built your life and success till now. The problem isn't that the fear engine exists. It's that fear sometimes speaks when it has no business leading in that context. Like the problem isn't the hunger engine. It's that hunger running unchecked when sufficiency is already present is sabotaging. So mastery here looks a lot less like removal and a lot more like timing. Like think about jazz. A great jazz musician doesn't play fewer notes because notes are bad. He knows when not to play. He leaves space. He lets tension hang. If he fills every bar or every beat, the music becomes crowded. Or think about martial arts. Force applied at the wrong moment is clumsy and will get you defeated. Force applied at the right moment is decisive and precise. The difference isn't strength, it's restraint. So the work then is learning when a system has authority and when it doesn't. It's not about crushing that engine. It's definitely not about worshiping that engine. It's simply deciding deliberately which parts will be active and who leads. Okay, so let's bring this all together. Success is often built by inner machinery. These were systems that learned way back when how to function under pressure, like a fear engine that sharpens your focus, or hunger that sustained your effort, or approval sensitivity that read the room well, or an aggression engine that pushed through resistance. These systems didn't sabotage you. They built your life. The complication is that this inner machinery does not retire automatically. It keeps running long after the original conditions that it was adapted and built for have changed. And when it keeps running unseen, it continues to choose for you. You think you're deciding freely, but often the most rehearsed system speaks first, and then your rationalizing reason follows. That's the whole point of this episode. Not to condemn those systems, not to eliminate them, but to see them clearly enough that you can regain your true authority. So here's another example to make this more concrete. So a client I worked with had built a very successful company. By most measures, he'd won the first game. Financial security was no longer in question. His team was strong and his board trusted him. In fact, the feedback from the board was that he needed to trust his team more. But he kept taking on new initiatives, new expansions, new projects that required him to do late nights and face fresh pressure. When we slowed down enough to examine this, he realized something uncomfortable for him. The drive that once protected him from irrelevance was still running. Earlier in his life, being indispensable actually kept him safe. It earned respect from the right people. It gave him a place that was secure. But now, long after he had secured that place, that same machinery kept creating new problems for him to solve. He wasn't chasing growth because the company required it at that level or that pace. He was chasing the familiar sensation of urgency. Without it, he felt exposed, unsafe. Not in danger so much, just unstructured. And once he saw that clearly, nothing dramatic happened right away. He definitely didn't sell the company or anything. He didn't renounce ambition. He began instead asking a different question before committing to new expansions. A simple question. Is this really required? Or is this my machinery looking for extra work? And that small and frequent pause changed the shape of his weeks, of his months. It gave him his evenings back to start. It altered how he showed up with his girlfriend. It shifted which risks he considered worth taking, not because he suppressed his drive, but because he placed it under conscious authority. If this stays unexamined, the consequences are rarely explosive. They're cumulative. Years and years and decades of drift. Relationships shaped more by reflex and reaction rather than by choice. Ambition quietly replacing meaning again, simply because it's what's familiar. The upside of seeing clearly isn't just peace or permanent contentment. It's the freedom to choose for yourself truly. It's more deliberate restraint. It's choosing responsibility in a way that feels cleaner and has more meaning for you. And desire that has somewhere honest to go rather than being channeled into the nearest available project. When you understand your own inner machinery, you don't become passive. You become precise. You decide which engines you will run and when. And that decision, made soberly and without any drama, is what aligns the life you've built with the person you are now becoming and want to become. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any feedback whatsoever, I'd love to get it. Send me an email or leave a comment. I'd love to get your feedback. I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode. Until then, David Tian, signing out.